All right, some people are going to like this video. Some people are going to like, what did you do that for? All right, sometimes you can be going through the pencil bin. Here's the pencil bin, I call it. Pencils, pens. And in there you'll find some history because you really don't use pencils anymore. In my case, I use a mechanical pencil. But sitting here, uh, this 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 is from my first job, Woolway in North Arlington. They were heavy into giving out pencils and pens. And this is a TRW uh, customer service pencil from Fairfield, New Jersey, and the coveted R.E.T.S pencil. Now, R.E.T.S Electronic School in Nutley, every time you paid your bill, I think it was like 80 bucks a week, 60 bucks a week. Originally, to get into the school, they gave you this phony test. They got $800 cash from you. You'd start going to the school, and a lot of the kids would drop out. And in with us were kids where the government was paying for their school, whether they had been in the military or they were a minority of some sort that couldn't afford higher education. So you'd have those kids in there. And those kids never seemed to pay their bill. They were given the money, and then they had to pay the school, and they'd get kicked out. So after a while, we didn't have them. But you would get one of these pencils every time you paid. Now, you give them $800 originally, and then there was a weekly payment. And the big gripe in the school was the parking lot wasn't paved. It was all stone. And the kids would burn out and throw the stones on other kids' cars. So the running joke in the school was they had no parking lot. They did have a parking lot, but it was more of a dirt track. Okay, and years later it did get paved. And one of the problems with the school was the guy running it was taking the money for maintenance. He was absconding with it. I actually know the guy's name. After I left the school, my sister had a friend that worked there, and she was there when the whole thing blew up. But I want to talk to you about the different schools. Now, here's a R.E.T.S certificate, and every semester you'd be given one of these certificates. And this is so if you quit the school and you went for a job, okay, you could still maybe get in and get something because you had gone through part of the school. Now, the real diploma was kind of slick, and it stayed. I remember this is a long time ago. This is ancient history, 1970. They gave you this nice booklet, and you're supposed to take this with you to your job interview. And on one side of this thing, if it will open, okay, they gave you this promotional thing you hand the guy, and it tells you basically what your degree is worth. You know, it's like a junior engineer, an associate's degree in electronics that you get from the college. But then this is the actual diploma, and it does have some real gold on it. I don't know, it's probably 10 cents worth, but they did go the whole rate. Now, what made R.E.T.S different than the other schools? All right, now first off, R.E.T.S was cheap. It was super cheap, and at the same time, you had I'll tell you some of the names. Bell and Howell, which I believe Bell and Howell and DeVry was the same thing. Now, my father took a home study course from Lee DeForest, and he claimed that company, Lee DeForest, became DeVry, which got involved with Bell and Howell. Now, R.E.T.S was R.E.T.S Simpson, like the scopes. Most of the equipment in the school was Simpson meters, signal generators. Now, so they were involved. So R.E.T.S was an offshoot of R.E.T.S was an offshoot of Simpson. All right. Now, where did they get the material to teach you? Well, R.E.T.S was different than the other school. R.E.T.S got the rights to, I think there were Army manuals and Navy stuff. And it was a fast course. It was a 3-year course in 18 months, condensed. There were no days off. You went Monday through Friday, and other people were getting days off and Christmas. R.E.T.S minimum, very minimum. They want to get you in the door, get your money from you, and get you out. Yes, it was a paper mill. A paper mill? Yeah, I guess you call it a paper mill. It's not a puppy mill, so we'll call it a paper mill. In other words, there was a need for people coming out of high school that couldn't get into college to find a place that got a deferment. Now, the deferment for the military was good because the military didn't really want to take you when you were really young, and they wanted you to maybe understand electronics or whatever. So they gave you a deferment. Well, halfway through R.E.T.S, or whatever it was, the guy came in and made an announcement that R.E.T.S deferment was no longer any good. And as soon as you turned 18, you were going to be gone. The government would probably take you. Well, they didn't. But anyway, so half the class got up and left. The next morning, the other half that was still there didn't show up. They talked it over with their parents. They decided to go sign up for the Navy. Okay? So in the R.E.T.S system, it's R.E.T.S Simpson. Okay? All the equipment is Simpson meters. They're real cheap stuff. The scopes were cheap. They were very bottom end. And you would get these manuals, these little, they actually were that 3-ring binder ones. And we used to kid at the end of each semester, one of these, you would get one of these in the booklets. We used to get these in the binder booklets. And we made jokes about it. The one guy realized that R.E.T spelled backwards is steer. There was all kinds of picking on the school because the parking lot wasn't paved. The air conditioner didn't work right, so me and the instructor went up there and changed some belts and fuses and got it working. Everybody complained that school was too expensive for what you got. But I want to tell you, we had this instructor called Jake Miller for most of the time. The first semester, we had 8 different instructors. It kept changing. They kept firing the guys. They'd hire another one, they'd fire them. And some of the instructors were wackadoodles. This one guy, Spaven, he was into adopting children, and that's all he kept stopping at what he was teaching and talking about each kid that he adopted. He was strange, okay? And then Mr. Taylor was like a real layback guy, and they fired him, and he used to talk like this. So everybody in the class would talk like this. Friday's my last day. I've been laid off. Funny stuff, but you did get an education in R.E.T.S if you paid attention. And in later years, I had to work with people that were from R.E.T.S, DeVry, Bell and Howell, whatever that was, RCA, and there was one more, IT&T, whatever. There was a bunch of them. And they all were tied to some type of electronic company. RCA had a company, a big company at the time. And Bell and Howell was heavy into projectors and audiovisual stuff. And they grabbed onto DeVry, and IT&T was into military electronics. But I think in some cases, the name got bought and it shifted over, like Bell and Howell now. If you buy something that's Bell and Howell, it has nothing to do with the old company. They bought the name. If you buy an RCA television, it's not an RCA. RCA's defunct. Emerson's defunct. But you can go to a store and still find products with those names on it. That's because that company bought the name. All right? But in 1970, when you're coming out of high school, and you can't get into college, because it wasn't expensive. College wasn't expensive. The books were expensive. You can piss and moan to get there every day could be expensive. But my sister went to college, and it was about $3,000 something for 4 years. Okay? And R.E.T.S was more. R.E.T.S was more money than college, but you graduated sooner. But there's so many things that were going on. There were schools that you could become a draftsman. There were schools you could go learn air conditioning. Okay? And I liked electronics since I was little. And I used to walk down in Kearney. There was this little blue building next to Two Guys store. And when you looked in there, you could see it was the R.E.T.S. That's where R.E.T.S originally was, in Kearney, but it was throughout the country. And I said to the guys I used to walk to Two Guys with, I'm going to go to that school. I said, I'm not going to college. I knew early on. And I went to R.E.T.S after high school. And this other kid who just died, he went with me at the same time, but he was 1 class ahead of me. They had a new class every 6 weeks or 8 weeks, And as soon as he graduated high school, he immediately went in. So within a few days of graduating high school, he started R.E.T.S. I waited till the end of the summer. All right, and I worked my ass off. I put money away for pay for R.E.T.S. myself. I worked at that pencil I showed you, Woolway. I worked at that. That place was across the street from my house. And that guy used to constantly pick on R.E.T.S kids because they couldn't solder. So when I went to the school, I brought my own Weller soldering gun with me. And they gave you a Wen. And the Wen had a band of steel. And when you clicked it on, it would go red hot and the solder would repel off it. You couldn't tip a Wen soldering iron. It was just a band of red hot steel. Okay, so I brought my Weller every day, and I sort of showed a couple kids how to solder, but it was absolutely true. After you came out of R.E.T.S, you weren't very good at soldering. Okay, because most of the labs had Fahrenstock clips, those little clips you push down and you put the wire underneath. Most of the labs in the beginning used those clips. They used a lot of I'm gonna forget the ones, the binding posts. You unscrew the thing, you put the wire in it, you tighten it up. Soldering was on the 5-tube radio, the R.E.T.S radio, which was an All-American 5 radio. But the difference between the R.E.T.S student was defined by several of my bosses. He says R.E.T.S students are more likely to roll their sleeve up and get dirty. Where the Bell and Howell guys were well known for smoking pot. Okay, even the kids that went there said it was really bad. In other words, the kids would just step outside to smoke, and it would smoke pot, and everybody looked the other way. All right? Now, in R.E.T.S, you got a break every hour or something, and the kids would smoke, but they didn't smoke pot. Okay? That was a no-no, because we had this guy called Mr. Whalen. Mr. Whalen used to, when he talked, it was a cross between Elmer Fudd and W.C. Fields, and he would not stand for any of that crap in the school. But the school itself was this crappy building, metal chairs. They had no backs on them. At one point, they spray painted the rooms, and they got the kids that worked there to paint the chairs and the desks and stuff. And all the kids did was scratch their names and profanity into the chairs and stuff. It was the bottom end of life. It was kids like myself that couldn't get into college, that wanted a deferment, and then the deferment went away, and we lost the real losers. A lot of the real losers exited, okay? And at first they started exiting because they couldn't pay the weekly fee. The parents would give them the money, and it would never make it to the school. And I could tell you names of the people that did that. The one kid, we called him a gearhead, and he would take the money from his parents. They'd give him the money for the school, and then he would go out to the racetrack with his car. And they kept him back. They used to recycle you, they called it. And he recycled to the class behind us. He pulled the same shit on his parents again. But the school was the basics. And like I said, it was a military manuals. And like they were 3-ring binder. And every morning would start out with the teacher walking around passing these little pamphlets out with the 3-ring clip. And you hear all the booklets pop open. And every so many months, they give you another binder. Now, I could show you all those loose leaf ring notebooks with all the educational materials from R.E.T.S, but this kid swore to me he was going to study this stuff at home. And I was in McGraw-Edison, and he was trying to move up, and he gave my boss this bullshit story. My boss gave me a bullshit story. So I gave him the R.E.T.S, all the R.E.T.S binders, all the information so you could study on your own. And I had a feeling he disappeared. He quit the place and took off with, and he borrowed money from me too. And that's where all my R.E.T.S went. But I would have saved that just for the fun, because when you go through it, they got these old guys from like the Navy, and they're sitting there at a table, and they got an oscilloscope with like a sawtooth on there or a sine wave, and it was that rudimentary. Okay, now the difference with our class was we had this guy, Jacob Miller. He was an Army sergeant in communications. And he was a ball breaker, and he was a bullshit artist. But what he did was he was trying to get in big with the upper echelons of the school. So he went around, he started fixing everything. And we were redoing the television sets because they had all like graffiti on them and stuff. We had these Motorola radios for they had a taxi cab. See, a lot of companies would donate stuff to the school, and it would just get put in the closet. With this guy Miller, he'd pull it out, and he'd get the manuals, and we'd start working on it. So our class, when it went through, had hands-on learning on stuff that the average person wouldn't see. A taxi cab radio. It was a Motorola, and that's a communications receiver. So it got my interest peaked a little bit. There was a few things I really didn't understand at the time because the teacher couldn't explain it. One of the things was, you know when a walkie-talkie years ago, you changed the crystal to change the frequency. Well, the Motorola radio, you would put a crystal in there, and you could get 5 different channels by realigning the IF. And then the transmit part had to use a crystal. You couldn't cheat on that. And I was like, that was weird, but that allowed me to realize that when you got a receiver that was out of alignment, what you really had to fix, okay? But there were so many things in that school that were wacky, okay? I one time called the secretary Big Red one time. I was sitting up by the window, and I'm talking to someone, and she yelled over me, you can't be up front here. I said, where does it say that? And she says, blah, blah, blah. I said, okay, Big Red. Right? I said that to her. I called her Big Red right to her face. She had red hair. She was a hot girl. She was a dirty girl. And the next day she stopped. I used to walk to school sometimes. And she stopped and gave me a ride. You know, I thought about what I said to you. It wasn't really fair. You really weren't making that much noise. But she was okay. And then she'd pick up this other kid that I would walk with to school. And he was a bit of a creep. And then the next day she picked me up and said something to me like, I'll give you a ride, but I don't want your creepy friend. I said, let me back out. I said, I'll walk up there and walk with him. And she said, okay, and she went on. But I was riding to school with another kid that started earlier than me. But he finished earlier than me by so many weeks, and then I had to walk to school. But I want to tell you, that $800 down and $1,000 whatever I had to pay was worth it. My first job at McGraw-Edison, Thomas Edison Labs in West Orange, I made the money I paid for school for R.E.T.S back in overtime in just a few months. Okay, but after I finished R.E.T.S and worked at other places, people started telling me, "Oh, R.E.T.S is up to 9,000." I go, "You got to be kidding!" He goes, "No," and he says, "It's still the same course." And they wanted to pay the instructors more, and then later on, it became R.E.T.S. They teach you how to draw blood and stuff there, and the building's still there, and it's part of a Warwick College. I can't remember the name of it offhand, but the building is still there. If you look up R.E.T.S in Nutley, you'll still see it's listed, but it's basically a medical, and it's part of a college. And the funny thing was, across the street there was a bar where you could get sausage sandwiches and meatball sandwiches, and that's part of the college now too. And the funny thing was, we were in R.E.T.S. Like, I won't say the guy's name, but we were in R.E.T.S, and this one kid went over there and he was hanging out at the bar, and the girl lived upstairs from the bar, and he got friendly with her, and she was underage, and he went and had sex with her, and the old man came over. The old man came right over into the school, and he was screaming, and no one could understand what he's saying. And I looked at this kid. I got to make sure I don't say his name, and I knew he was involved somehow. And I went out at break time, and I said, "What?" He goes, "Oh yeah, so and so went over there, had sex with her upstairs, and she's underage." And I'm like, "Oh my God!" But the insanity in R.E.T.S was funny stuff. Okay, just the different types of people that went to go for electronics because they didn't know what they wanted to do. And out of a class of there were 2 sections. I think 15 of us finished, and out of the 15, maybe 6 of us actually went into electronics. And then one guy, he was my mailman. He went for sorting machines through the post office, and now he's pretty big in the post office. Okay, and then my one friend that I hung with in the school, he died, and then the other one is very sick right now. He might clock in if he sees this. He might chime in and say how he's doing, but it was worth every penny. And several bosses over the years just said to me, the R.E.T.S guys are absolutely the best. You know, to go through that course under those conditions, crappy air conditioning, you know, places around there to eat. The other schools had all kinds of restaurants around them. And our school, I used to walk up to McDonald's. Well, actually, the first few weeks, and then I met this guy, Bill, and he would drive. We drive every day to McDonald's. Every single day for a year, we ate at McDonald's. Okay? And then R.E.T.S put a cafeteria in for us, and they did cook food, and they had some machines there, servomation machines, and I can't think of the other one that used to do the crackers. Anyway, it was interesting, okay? And then you get out of R.E.T.S and you go to places, and you show them this thing, and they either look down their nose at you, or they start talking like, yeah, we got several R.E.T.S guys here, they're pretty good. And once that guy says that, you got your foot in the door, okay? And a lot of the one boss that did hire me, well, I'm really looking for guys that went to RCA. Good luck, okay? They were few and far between. The Bellenhout potheads, they were a dime a dozen. And even the guys that went to the school would tell you how bad the pot was. And those guys, when you're training them on the electronic equipment, all they're talking about is pot. You know, I got to get my pot. I got to make sure. I was like, holy, it's like with an alcoholic wanting the next drink. But I think that's it. I hope you enjoy this. You know, like I said, this is ancient history. You know, and one guy asked me, he went to R.E.T.S with me, and he asked me in the email one day, he says, did you keep your stuff? And I did. I kept it. I just can't throw this out. It's just too funny stuff. You know, like how cheap it was, you know, and everybody in the classroom complaining. But there was really no alternative for us because we couldn't get into college. And that was it. It wasn't R.E.T.'s fault. It was our fault. We didn't have the grades or the ambition to go to college, so we settled. And my thing is electronics. So you'd say, well, if I was smarter and applied it myself more, I probably would have went to the NJET, New Jersey Engineering something. There was a big engineering college in Newark, New Jersey, in a bad neighborhood, but that was the place to go to get your engineering degree, which sort of vaporized because later on, a lot of companies weren't hiring engineers anymore. Everything was being made overseas and stuff. I think that's it. All right, that's it.